Are you able to take yourself back and give a bit of a almost play-by-play on the mindset and the moments when you realized that you had to take on bigger responsibilities and you had to shrug off the fear to do certain things during the instance that was your Medal of Honor?
Oh, sure. I mean, I had been in a lot of combat before that,
Well,
in a lot of difficult circumstances before that, and the same thing happened. I did something, or my NCO did something, or other soldiers in the unit did something, which turned the tide of the tactical battle. I mean, you're not thinking about geopolitics when you're in the middle of a firefight, your friends are killed or wounded, and you're about ready to get overrun, or you have an opportunity to eliminate the enemy and give your unit a success, tactical success they otherwise wouldn't have. That happens every day in combat. You know, it's interesting about not just the Medal of Honor, but any act of valor. You think about what it takes to be recognized for a valorous award. Somebody has to see it. You have to do something. They have to be able to write, and they can't hate you. Those are the 4 requirements. So think about all the people who performed valiantly and nobody saw it. Or people did see it, but they themselves were killed. There were no witnesses. Or what happens from time to time, people did see it and they wrote it up or reported it, and for one reason or other, either accidentally or sometimes on purpose, the recommendations were destroyed or lost. And you realize that when somebody is recognized for a valorous act in combat, he's not representing what he did. He's representing the actions of all those who weren't recognized, particularly those who never came back. And that's why, in particular, Medal of Honor recipients will say that they don't wear the medal for themselves. They wear it for all those who can't.
That's a beautiful sentiment. And on that note of those, I want to try to understand a little bit what, if you can remember the moments when you shifted into gear from that. It could have been a split second or 10 seconds or I have to, but this is happening. I have to.
No, it was a split second. It was a split second, and that happens all the time, every day in combat. You have to make a split second decision. We had walked into a giant ambush that the enemy had set over a period of 3 days. We'd been fighting them. This is just after the Tet Offensive in '68. And then they broke contact, and the enemy had 3 days to put together this giant L-shaped ambush. Our scout platoon, which was supposed to be screening to the front, was not in sight. To this day, 50 some odd years later, I can't tell you where they were, but I can tell you where they were not. They were not in front of us where they were supposed to be. And you know, you're supposed to contact the enemy with the smallest possible force so that you maintain your flexibility and your optionality, and you can then maneuver around. You don't want your main force decisively engaged. But unfortunately, that's exactly what happened. And the enemy let us get to within about 50 meters of their position before they sprung the ambush. We had a significant portion of our 2 lead companies. I and my NCO were accompanying the 2 lead companies, were killed or wounded in the first 10, 15 seconds of the battle. And it turned out to be a split second. I mean, everybody was either killed or wounded. And we're in a very difficult position in open terrain and lots of, you just make a decision. But you don't think about it, really. Don't forget you rely on your training. But most of all, you rely on the instinct that somebody's got to do something. I mean, it was a genuine crisis. You know what a crisis is? We overuse the term crisis all the time. I used to work for a guy who said everything's a crisis. If everything's a crisis, then nothing's a crisis. A crisis is a very specific circumstance. Things are bad. They're getting worse. Something has to be done. Has to be done right now. And if it isn't done right now, it's all going down the drain. There are very few circumstances that are like that. Not surprisingly, most of them occur in combat. And so people all the time are making split-second decisions because they instinctively recognize that this is a crisis. Something has to be done. Nobody else can do it, and I better do it. And that's exactly what happens in combat.
So if not that, then what was your experience and what was going through your mind when you did receive that auspicious decoration? And you mentioned that you always think about so many of those who never got the opportunity for those 4 reasons. But aside from that, was there any? What was the thoughts going through your mind?
Well, I mean, I was a young kid still. I was only, I think I was 24 at the ceremony. I wasn't quite 23, and when I was engaged in my action. And one of the things that goes through your mind is that how humble you are, because you're representing all those kids, all those friends of yours who never came back. But I also did think about the fact that I was one of the few Jews recognized. We've had quite a few Jewish Medal of Honor recipients, most of them killed in action, and that I represented not just them, but the Jewish community. And that's a very powerful thing. I'll tell you an interesting anecdote. And it's, the day after I was decorated, there were 4 of us who were decorated in the same ceremony from the Army, but in different actions, but we were all decorated together. And interestingly, we're the only people decorated in the same ceremony who are still alive, all 4 of us. So we're not all that young anymore. In any case, they scheduled the ceremony to coincide with the biennial get-together of the Medal of Honor recipients, who that year were meeting in Houston. And at that time, there were 400 living recipients. They put us on Air Force One the very next day and took us down to Houston in time for the gala dinner, which culminated the meeting of the Medal of Honor recipients. And the people in the room were all household names. Audie Murphy and Joe Foss and Admiral O'Kane, and there was a living recipient named Bill Seach who had conducted a bayonet charge on the Citadel at Beijing in 1900 in the Boxer Rebellion. He was still there, and so on. In any case, I'll try to adumbrate all this. At the end of the dinner, Jimmy Doolittle came up to me. Jimmy Doolittle led the one-way suicide mission to bomb Tokyo in 1942 to demonstrate to the Japanese that we were coming back, that, in the words of Yamamoto, they unleashed a tiger. And Yamamoto argued strenuously that they shouldn't bomb Pearl Harbor. He led it anyway because he was the boss, but he said this is a really bad idea. And it turned out to be a really bad idea for the Japanese. Jimmy Doolittle, who at the time was a retired 3-star general and who was a household name, came up to me, put his arm around my shoulder, and took me to the corner of the ballroom. And he said, "Young man, let me tell you something. You're no longer Jack Jacobs. You're Jack Jacobs Medal of Honor recipient, and you better comport yourself accordingly. Do you understand what I am telling you?" I said, "Yes, sir, I sure do." It was then that it occurred to me, more so than during the ceremony, which I can barely remember. It occurred to me that I represented all those people who performed valiantly and were not recognized, particularly those who didn't come back, but also that I represented all Jews, not just those who were in service, but all those. I represented American Jews, and I I better comport myself accordingly.
That actually very much leads into what my next question was going to be, which is Medal of Honor recipients. It's kind of like an Academy Award or Olympian. Once it occurs, you are that for the rest of your life, and you've led a life as a Medal of Honor recipient. So, are you able to give some insight into what that experience has been like?
Well,
journey.
It's very difficult to avoid being a professional Medal of Honor recipient, especially since there were 400 or so when I was decorated, and now there are only 61 of us. And we're a wasting asset. So the demands on your time are substantial, and it's difficult. I tell newly minted Medal of Honor recipients all the same thing, and have for almost 60 years. You've got to be judicious about your time, and you're going to feel the weight of the medal. Some recipient in the past has said it's harder to wear the medal than it is to earn it in the first place, because you're going to feel the responsibility of representing all people who've worn the uniform at everything, and you're going to get lots and lots of requests to show up at various events. You're going to meet yourself coming and going, and you're going to have to learn to make judicious decisions about how you spend your time. Some recipients don't do anything. They don't go anywhere. Now's the case. A lot of them don't go because they can't go. I mean, of the 60 recipients, only about 30 of us can get up, can wander around under our own power and so on. So the demands are especially heavy. Others try to do everything. They say yes to everything and find that that's a very bad course of action. I mean, they can't do it, and then despair of ever being able to make a contribution. But if you're selective about what you say yes to and what you say no to, then you can, in fact, make a substantial contribution by talking to kids in school, poisoning young minds, which I love to do, disappraising the rubbish that they hear elsewhere, and so on, and really having an impact on future kids, in particular kids. So I talk to schools and colleges and universities. I talk to corporate headquarters all the time, who are also misinformed about most things, and try to give them the benefit of my opinion on just about everything. But it's difficult to go from being Joe Schmo soldier to being somebody people want to listen to. It's very difficult to do, and you have to be smart about what you select to do.
And on you as your person and your esteem, what has that done to you?
Well, it certainly makes you humble, to be recognized, because you know that there are other people who should be recognized who are not, for all the reasons I enumerated. There's a Medal of Honor recipient from Vietnam named Brian Thacker, who once very wistfully, when he was getting interviewed, he's still alive, said, there are 3 grieving mothers still whose sons were every bit as brave that day. And you reflect on all the bravery of the people who should have been recognized but were not. That makes the burden extremely heavy, and the older you get, the heavier it gets. You're representing all those ghosts who aren't here now. You don't think about that as much when you're young, but you do when you get older.
The last sort of thought on the Jewish aspect is when you received your Medal of Honor, obviously with a name like Yaakov Jacobs, it's
Yaakov Ben David.
Well, there we go. It's very clearly a Jewish name, and the papers are gonna write about it, and very much representing the Jewish community, whether you wanted to or not. So in those moments, did you think about that aspect of representation?
Yes, but after the fact, it wasn't something that. Don't forget, a lot of people who served and a lot of people who serve now, they go in when their obligation is over, they get out. So, they serve, but they're really civilians most of the time. And then you have to put up with the transition from being part of something bigger than yourself to being on your own, more or less, which for many people is very, very difficult in the current environment when most people don't serve, and almost everybody you meet does. Nobody has the same experience you do. When I was in, I stayed in the Army. I was supposed to serve for 3 years. My obligation was up after 3 years, but I stayed. But I stayed because I really loved the people and I didn't want to leave them. And today, when people ask me, what do I miss most about the Army? It's the people. I love being around people who have served. I love people who are serving. I always feel better when I'm around them. And so when I came back from Vietnam and later on when I was decorated, I was still in a military environment. And so I thought of myself primarily as a soldier. Plenty of Jews still in the Army too, with services and all the rest that served with them. Thought about overtly thinking about being a Jew, which is something I do all the time anyway, just sort of instinctively. More so when on Shabbat and holidays than usual, but it didn't make a difference to me because I was a soldier. And by the way, so were they. When I taught at West Point, with which you are very familiar, I'll put things in a proper perspective. We have a lovely chapel there. After enormous effort, over a long period of time. When I was teaching at West Point, when I was a captain and a major in the mid-1970s, and we had Shabbat services in Bartlett Hall, in a chemistry lab. So we had to move the retorts and all the experiments off the bema so we could bring the Torah out. I mean, things have changed dramatically and all for the better. But the fact that it was difficult to be a Jew, as you know the old saying, it was difficult being a Jew. That made it easier. That bound us together more than if it were really easy to be a Jew. But being a Jew was never far from my mind. But I was a soldier first and foremost.